Hello and welcome back to our 6-week Skillful Living program. My name is Venerable Tarpa, and I am absolutely thrilled to be here. It's a lovely Sunday here in South Bend, Indiana, where I'm currently staying. Beautiful weather out there. This week we are going to be focusing on, this is our 4th week and our 7th class of our practice. Let's start there. And this week, we're going to be focusing on understanding our suffering. And I know that doesn't sound like a really great topic to spend the week studying, but between you and me, I find it one of the most inspirational practices of the week of study, right? And because, of course, we're understanding our suffering so we can attain happiness. So even though we're talking about our suffering, we're really talking about attaining happiness. But I think it's a fascinating take from the Buddhist standpoint and ultimately deeply, deeply beneficial. But before doing so, let's briefly review what we learned in last week's class. And of course, you all know we were studying appreciation, and we were practicing our practice of awakening through appreciation. And this morning, we finished that practice, or we're engaging in it today. It's a kind of an odd practice that we started a little early, we go a little later. And we're practicing it today by engaging in the last aspect of the 6 levels of awakening through by engaging in sustained appreciation, which is cultivated is the cultivation of appreciation as a constant and enduring state of mind. So, sustained appreciation is attained through the cultivation and mastery of the combined levels of appreciation that we learned last week. So, this sustained appreciation is then maintained. We have an affirmation that we recite that includes all of the different combined levels. And then we use that in our daily practice to remind us of that. And we continue that throughout this program and hopefully throughout your life, that it'll be a constant part of your morning practice to just always remind yourself of that. So, with that said, does anybody have any questions, comments, or insights about last week's practice? This is often everybody's favorite week of the practice. And for those who really engage in it, it appears to be life transforming. Do you guys remember what I told you about Alberto when he did the practice? My dear Italian friend. And he says, Tarpa is like I got a new eyes. That's my beautiful Tuscany accent. He said that it changed the way he saw the world. And even now, when I talk to him, he says that it's still with him. He's never lost it. It profoundly changed the way he looks at the world, and for the better, right? Anybody have any good experiences this week? Did this practice of appreciation seem to open up your wonder and appreciation for your lives and the world? Hello? Is this thing on? Is the microphone working? Oh, now the hands go up. David, please share with me.
Yeah, I'm not really sure I got it until we did sustained appreciation, and I really felt that's a keeper. That if I can just stay with that for the rest of my days, I won't be doing too badly.
Oh, that's
So
lovely.
thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, oh, that's lovely. Jen, please share.
Well, as some of you know, my neighbor has a yard that I don't really like. He has a brick pile close to my yard that I've, had a lot of bad feelings about and stuff. But, after doing this week's practice, I was thinking today, well, he's just another person. He has another yard style. I don't like it, but it's his style. He's not over there, you know, doing loud. He's not loud, and I just started thinking about good qualities that he had. So,
Yeah.
I hope that's from the practice.
Well, it sounds like you're combining two. It sounds like you're using acceptance from last week and you're using appreciation from this week. But if it works, that's absolutely wonderful. Yeah. This practice for me just completely changes the way I look at the world. At higher levels of practice, when you really get into it, it starts to just permeate all aspects of your life. And I find myself just sitting around appreciating the dumbest things. Like I'll be sipping a glass of water and I'll just start to contemplate, the how clear and pure it is, and that I could just turn on my faucet and there it is. But literally just all the things in your life you just naturally start to appreciate. And it changes the way you look at the world. The world almost becomes a little magical. You know, all the things in the life you start to see are just miracles. Like you see a butterfly, and we've seen hundreds of butterflies through our lives, but all of a sudden it's just different. And you're just in awe and wonder of the existence of this thing, or your dog, or your kids, or your house, a single beautiful day. It's just you're blissed out by the experience, right? And so it almost feels like your life just becomes magical and you're living in this wondrous land, this experience. And so that's where the practice of appreciation can lead you. So I hope you all continue to practice. Okay, what else do I got for you? Oh, why don't we get on to today's class? Without further ado, again, this week we're going to be focusing on understanding our suffering. And what's interesting is the Buddha decided to start his teachings on this subject, where so which is taught in the Four Noble Truths. Um, and for myself, I thought, well, it's a little heavy for a lot of just regular modern people that are, used to their Netflix and their phones. And I thought, why don't we start with a bit of a brighter topic? So we kind of start with some of the brighter ones. But this is singularly important in Buddhist teachings. So when working to develop happiness, clearly we also have to come to terms with what prevents us from attaining happiness. So we gave you some great tools so far for developing happiness, the threefold path. We have the 4 steps to acceptance, our week of appreciation, our first week of cultivating and developing virtue and goodness. Um, but we also have to come to terms with our suffering, that which prevents our happiness. So in Buddhism, all the experiences that make up our lives are seen as existing within a spectrum, with suffering at one end and happiness at the other. So all your experiences, no matter what they exist on this spectrum. Suffering and what we don't like and don't want on one end, happiness, all the stuff we like, all the stuff we want at the other, right? All human experience and animal experience fits on that spectrum. But this spectrum is complex, um, because it's just not that simple that we suffer or we're happy. Oftentimes, these qualities can coexist, right? So I list some different versions or examples in the text, but like one that we can get a new job and be ecstatic about that, while at the same time instantly starting to worry and have expectations about starting it. Can I do it? Will they like me? Um, and we have constant examples of this. Um, but I think one of the best examples is our relationships with others, and which can be so complex. So I know parents out there, they always love their kids, but there are times where they're not so sure they like the kids, right? Depending on their behavior. But I think in intimate relationships between partners, I think it's the best example. What they call love-hate relationships. I'm sure everybody knows that the people have a relationships that are volatile and they just keep bouncing back and forth between extremes, from strong anger to deep love, and so both can exist at the same time. The term suffering within its Buddhist context includes all forms of physical, mental, and emotional pain and suffering. And this means from the most excruciating pain, whether that's childbirth or breaking your femur bone, which they say is one of the most painful, but it's also to the subtlest of irritations, insecurities, and longings, like existential longings. And examples are for physical suffering, things like a toothache, illness, and injury is suffering. Mental suffering, like debilitating fear, depression, or upsetting sense experiences, like witnessing an accident. And then we have emotional suffering, like the loss of a loved one, being insulted, rejected, feeling unfulfilled or lonely. And of course, suffering arises not only in relation to our own injuries and experiences, but also when witnessing the suffering of others, especially our loved ones, right? According to the Buddha, the immediate cause of our suffering arises from our desires. Now, here they're talking more about mental suffering. Uh, Clearly, when we get into an accident, when we fall down and we have physical illness, that injury is a bit different. But here we're talking more about mental suffering, and this arises from our desire. In the Pali text, the term desire is an interpretation of the word tana, which is literally defined as thirst, and is commonly translated as craving, greed, or desire. The thirst we want, right? It's that obsessive craving. And it pertains to our compulsive thirst to attain what we want, and at the same time, to be free from what we don't want, right? We can have we can have attachment and aversion. But this obsessive thirst or desire also has a more fundamental cause, which is ignorance, and ignorance of our true nature and the true nature of reality. In Buddhism, ignorance is defined as not knowing, knowing the wrong thing, or not wanting to know. And I've always been fascinated by the third, not wanting to know. And I think maybe we've all experienced that in our lives, that some things are just too real and we just push them away. Um, to put it simply, we suffer because we don't understand who and what we are or the way life works, which leads us to making poor choices, choosing wrong goals and aims in life. And of course, it all results in unhappy lives. Buddhism refers to these causes behind our suffering as afflictions. Oftentimes in the Buddhist text, they translate it as the word defilements. I prefer the word afflictions. Afflictions are seen as being acquired, similar to an illness, and not aspects of our true nature, which in Buddhism asserts as being naturally pure, benevolent, compassionate, and wise. Afflictions are those things that prevent us from being healthy and whole, that which prevent us from realizing and experiencing our true nature. I often refer to afflictions as shared human limitations, the afflictions or limitations that all human beings share. And these are many. We have things like greed, aversion, ignorance, self doubt, insecurity, immaturity, selfishness, lack of self control, anxiety, laziness, to name a few. Our afflictions and limitations are not chosen, but instead are acquired, arising from our fundamental ignorance, which represents one end of that evolutionary spectrum between confusion at one end, which we call samsara, and clarity at the other, which is called nirvana. Our afflictions and limitations are qualities that all human beings possess. No matter who you are, we possess all of these afflictions, but in different quantities and different degrees. We take something like anger. All human beings experience anger, but in different degrees. Some people it's quite problematic and they're not able to control it. Other people it's not. So we all have the same afflictions and limitations, just in different quantities and degrees, right? Um, However, we never choose them, right? None of us woke up one day in high school and decided to be an angry person or to be greedy or selfish or whatever it might be. Can you, can any of you remember choosing your afflictions? Whatever your, whatever afflictions that you battle throughout the day? Of course not. None of us choose them. They're simply qualities that all of us are trying to transcend, right? Some people, it seems like they're not trying very hard to transcend them, but I do believe all human beings are. We all have an image of the way we'd like to be, the way we'd like to look towards others, the way we'd like people to understand us, and we try to do everything we can to live up to that. But according to the Buddha, we should see our afflictions and limitations as similar to an illness, and the Buddhist teachings as a medicine needed to heal that affliction. What do you guys think? Joe?
Well, okay, I'm thinking about what you're saying there, that we don't choose our afflictions. And I'm not saying, we go out and say, hey, I want to be a greedy person. So this is what I'm going to do. But I guess my question then, Tarpa, is from the perspective of karma, meaning, our actions determine our future. Wouldn't in some instances, I don't want to say that we chose our afflictions, but maybe our past actions caused whatever afflictions we have to deal with now. So that's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, if we don't choose them and they're not a result of karma, are they just, kind of foisted upon us? Or, it's just a little confusing to me. That's all.
Sure. Yeah, in a sense, they are hoisted upon us. They're, according to the Buddha, they're acquired. An easy one to think about is afflictions that arise from traumatic events. It's not so much that we gain afflictions from our actions. It's more uh, the trauma that follows our actions, and but any kind of trauma, whether it's our actions or it's all the things you experience when you're a child growing up, And first of all, we're born into the greatest of all afflictions, the main affliction, which is where all afflictions come from, and that's ignorance.
Mm.
All sentient life, all species are born into ignorance. Babies don't know anything. They don't know the world around them. And so that's the first of all the great afflictions, and everything else arises from that. But then as you live your life, your experiences, they mold your personality. And
Mm.
they create afflictions, they create limitations, and they also can help foster our good qualities as well, right? All of your qualities are all arise from that. But Buddhism believes that our good qualities arise from our root qualities, three root qualities that we all possess, where the afflictions are more from these acquired things that we pick up through life. You can pick up qualities like anger. You can mirror other people's behavior. Maybe your father was an angry person, and growing up with him, that's how you believe you respond to situations when they arise. So we mirror our families, our friends. It's not always trauma.
Okay. Thank you.
And then for traditional Buddhists who believe in rebirth, they believe that a lot of these qualities come from prior lives and prior trauma. But I think afflictions in one way or another are always arise from a type of trauma, even mild trauma. Miss Rula?
Yes, I wanted to know if these afflictions that everyone has different afflictions, can we equate them to that part of the mind where our habits and is it volitions?
Volition is your intentional actions. So I wouldn't equate it with that. It's more of that which feeds our volitions.
Okay,
Our uh, afflictions change the way we look at the world, our
okay,
perspective, our perceptions, and
okay,
then afflictions they flavor and alter the way we make choices.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, David, please.
I just done the phrase, I did not choose my afflictions. Um, what do you mean by I in that sentence?
I mean, David
Yeah,
doesn't choose his afflictions.
yeah. But what is I? All right, so what do you mean by David? Same question.
David is the subjective person I'm talking to. David's you, conventionally. And David is the person that wearing the clothes you're wearing, having the experiences you're having. Buddhism doesn't deny the self. Buddhism doesn't deny the I. We just misunderstand it. That's where our problems come in. Oh, very existential question. It's you, man. I is me. We all know what it is. Buddhism never disagrees with that common way of looking at it. Buddhism does disagree with the way we exaggerate that into more than what it is. In Buddhism, I is a functional conceptual label and nothing more. But it's a very functional one. It's real, it's beneficial. I use it every day. The Buddha referred to himself. He says, "Hey, I'm going for a walk." It was a part of the Buddha's common language. Any other questions, everybody? What do you think of the Buddha's understanding of suffering? From the most excruciating pain to the mildest of irritations or longings, just the feeling, the existential quality of wanting to belong, right? Most of us aren't even aware of that quality, but we all know it's there inside us, don't we? It's a very human quality of just wanting to belong, whether it's a small family or a community. And the idea is if we feel like we don't have that, we suffer, right? Hey, pretty cool. Um, and what do you think about seeing afflictions as an illness? Do you get that? So according to the Buddha, they're acquired like you catch a cold. Somewhere in life you acquire your afflictions. And I really like the idea of calling them human limitations because it doesn't demonize them, and it kind of puts them in the proper perspective that they're um they're that which prevents us from awakening, from really flourishing, right? And the looking for oh, I'd never cared for the word defilements because it kind of made it sound like human beings were defiled, and it sounded very religious, make it sound like we're all born in sin and we're defiled. To me, that sounded just horrible. They're just afflictions, right? They're just limitations. So I think limitations is even a softer phrase. Okay, if there's no more questions, let's move along. I want to dig in a little deeper into our understanding of suffering. So clearly, we all want to avoid suffering. Everybody does. As the Dalai Lama says, all creatures tremble at the face of death, and they all want happiness. And of course, this is a reasonable and sensible aim, right? However, since being free of suffering is still beyond most of us, it's important to look at the possible benefits that come from suffering by looking at it objectively. According to Buddhism, there's a proper balance of happiness and suffering that is actually necessary for awakening. For it's our experience of suffering that actually creates the wish, the drive to be liberated uh, on the spiritual path. I think for many people, we wouldn't be on the Buddhist path itself if we didn't experience some suffering, if we weren't looking for a way to get out from under our suffering. The fact is that our suffering is often the source of many of our sought after qualities, like wisdom, maturity, compassion, and understanding others. Um, Through suffering, we develop courage and strength and patience, perseverance, while at the same time, it helps us to undermine our superficiality and self-centeredness, right? If you think about it, how do you practice patience or perseverance without some kind of adversity to practice against? Or how do you really know genuine compassion without knowing what that suffering is? In The word compassion is sometimes translated as to suffer along with another person, and the idea is true suffering, not just empathy that you feel bad for somebody, but compassion is seeing their suffering as your own, like something you've experienced. Like you see someone who doesn't have food, and you yourself have experienced that, and you know what it's like. That's really the idea of compassion. It's that firsthand knowledge of that suffering. And so, how do we develop that without suffering ourselves? Imagine if we didn't have any suffering. Boy, would we be superficial, huh? We'd be horrible beings, I think. We'd be very selfish, very superficial. We wouldn't have any empathy for anyone else. So, by acknowledging this, although we clearly don't want to suffer, when suffering does occur, we can appreciate the potential benefits it brings. And I often use that in my own practice. When something doesn't go the way I wanted it to go, I'll often say, well, it'll make me one step closer to a Buddha. And it works, right? And with that said, although some aspects of suffering are inevitable, like stubbing your toe, or others are not, meaning a great deal of our suffering are merely thoughts created by the mind. Our suffering is actually, again, quite complex, existing as layers of experience. The Buddha pointed out two significant aspects. The first being initial pain and suffering that arise from physical, mental, or emotional injury. Physical, emotion, mental, or emotional injury. They could all be injuries, right? But then there's a secondary suffering that arises as a reaction to injury, which compounds it and makes it worse. However, this secondary suffering is unique, for it arises purely from the mind in the form of our reaction to the initial suffering. This includes clinging to past suffering or fear of future suffering. This secondary suffering often exists as a story we create about our injury. So the Buddha said, when we suffer, when we suffer or we're injured, we suffer twice. One from the actual injury, and secondly through the mental projection of the event. Meaning that through imagining, worrying, grasping at, anticipating, and reliving the injury, we compound it, thereby deepening, prolonging, and exaggerating it. The Buddha compared these two types of suffering as being shot by two arrows. The first arrow is the physical, mental, and emotional pain and suffering from the initial injury. And the second arrow is the mental reaction to the event, our anguish, resistance, and aversion to the pain. So, some examples of this. So, the one I like the most, we can think about a physical injury, like you twist your ankle and you sprain your ankle and you're in pain. And of course, there's a lot of mental projection there. You could be worried that you're not going to be able to go to work, or you're not going to be able to do this and that. A lot of mental projection. But I think the greatest example is more related to emotional and mental suffering. And a great one is to somebody says something about you at the office place. They say something that's embarrassing to you, undermining your authority, whatever it might be, in front of others. A simple comment. What do we do with that? Right? We kind of put up with it at work. We think about it. But by the time we get home, we've turned it into something huge, haven't we? We're just thinking about it. We're adding things to it. Oh, I'll never be able to show my face at work. We exaggerate it, don't we? This is what the Buddha's talking about with secondary suffering. And we do it physically, emotionally, and mentally, right? Fear is another one. We can be afraid of a person that we encountered, and then we can think about it and just whip it up into this big event. Oh my God, maybe they'll come to my workplace or this or that. This is what we do. And we do with physical things as well. We get a pain in our side, and I guarantee you, an hour and a half later, we're convinced we have cancer. We're filling out our will, and we're wondering where we're going to buy burial insurance, and we're silly about that, right? So this is something that the Buddha shares, and I think it's quite brilliant. Um, any questions about that before I go on? What do you guys think about these two arrows? Isn't it true? Oh my gosh, I do it all the time. And then reliving past experiences, right? Somebody calls your name and Years later, you're at a picnic having a wonderful day, and all of a sudden that memory comes back to you, and you suffer again, far after the actual injury. Joe, please.
Wow, I could talk about this stuff with you all afternoon. Um, well, one of the things that I thought was very, and it looks like I'm looking up because I'm watching you guys on my TV. Um, but one of the things that I thought was um, very good that struck me in the reading was whenever you talk about our limitations as being fuel or defining them as energies. In fact, you included a quote by somebody that says if you could disassociate, um, if you don't look at the limitations as part of who you are, but rather look at them as an energy that's fueling you, it's easier to disassociate with those, and therefore they don't have as much power over you, and so in cases of maybe trauma, I've experienced trauma. Many of us have experienced trauma, but I think whenever we're able to distance ourselves from that somehow, some way, we don't identify as that, and we're able to move past it. And
It's
and and
true.
by by defining these as energies, I thought that was wonderful.
That
Much
very
easier to
good.
distance yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and
The
if
the
you think about
other
them like sickness, it's a lot the same way. When you get a cold, you never say, I am a cold.
yeah,
We know that it's an affliction. We know that it's passing. And even people that are born with genetic illnesses that they might have their whole lives, we never believe that illness is that person. Even to be born with it, we know it's an affliction. So, very much so. And yeah, a lot of it arises from these subconscious energies that are deep within us. And as we practice, we start to uncover that and we can work with it. And you can actually, you get to the point where you can feel the nature of that energy, whether it's virtuous or not, or skillful or not, productive or not. And you can get very skillful at working with our afflictions. Thank you, Joe. Wonderful. Okay, now on to the most important question. Can suffering be transcended? That's why you're all here. This was the very question that drove the Buddha for searching for enlightenment, right? This is why the Buddha left the palace grounds and tried to, his quest was to find the answer to that. Is there an end to suffering? And motivated by great compassion, the Buddhist quest began with an unwavering determination to find the answer to that question. And it ends with him sitting under the Bodhi tree with a vow that he would not arise again from his meditation until he had that answer. Upon reaching enlightenment, the Buddha arose possessing the answer to his quest because he had indeed attained the enlightened state, the state beyond suffering. Now, we often get a lot of questions about that traditional presentation of suffering. The first one is, since no one else is going to ask it, the first one is that the idea that suffering can be completely transcended. And that's a very confusing point in Buddhism. Yes, Buddhism asserts this in traditional Buddhism, but it's complex. So the idea is while we're being reborn, if we have a mind and body, there's no way to completely get rid of suffering. To own a mind and body is to suffer. The mind in your daily experiences, you can't go through life without seeing upsetting things, without having upsetting emotions, things like that. And the same with the body. The body is subject to old age, sickness, and death, no getting around that. Now, so in our lives, our Buddhist practice, we're able to transcend a great deal of that suffering. And some may argue that we have the ability within our lifetimes to live in a state of bliss, in pure happiness, with some moments of suffering. Now, the way that they assert that Buddhism leads to the absolute annihilation of suffering has to do with the rebirth process, and that as a person becomes a Buddha, and when they pass away as a Buddha, and they transcend rebirth, they no longer come back with a body and mind. Without a body and mind, it's possible to completely end suffering. And so that has a lot to do with everybody's personal beliefs on the subject, but that's the Buddhist take on it. That you can't completely eradicate suffering until you become a Buddha. But with that said, we can sure do a lot to work with it and diminish it. And I always talk about it in percentages, right? So if we can give you some tools and some practices to get rid of 20% of your suffering, who's on board with that? Any takers for 20%? How about 30%? Huh? But I believe, we can get up there to 90% as practitioners. I've experienced it in my own practice. I suffer so much less. Things like stubbing your toe, that's just things you always have to deal with. But we talk about that second arrow, that second suffering, you know, that is so diminished in my own life. I don't naturally go into that. Sure, it's still there, but it's just drastically, drastically reduced. And what happens is you gain control over your mind. You gain control over the thought process, what you think, and even whether you wish to think at all. And of course, that's what dispels the second arrow. Any questions? What do you guys think of that?
I have a question.
Please.
So question about I understand that existence as a sentient being implies a certain level of suffering, much of which you can transcend and some portion of it you can't. But then I recall there is obviously I can't recall exactly, but there's that attachment to non-existence or desire for non-existence, and that's something that's unskillful. If I recall correctly, or an unwholesome thought. So how is that? How do you reconcile that? Because I mean, a Buddha not having a mind or a body, that sounds like something that doesn't exist. So how do you desire Buddhahood, I suppose, or enlightenment to move away from existence, and it's not? How do you reconcile those things?
So that's one of the more complicated topics of Buddhism, as you can imagine. The Buddha, when asked this question, refused to answer. What does a Buddha exist or not exist after death? He wouldn't answer. And it said that he wouldn't answer because either answer he gave, people wouldn't understand. But there are some interesting passages, like one passage talks about this state that we're talking about. It appears to be I'll give you my own take on it. It appears to be an existent state, but not one that we can wrap our heads around. The Buddha talks about it's a state that lacks, because there's no mind or body, there's also no sense organs, right? So perception is different than we might think. But the Buddha, if I can remember the quote, the Buddha talks about there's no earth or other. There's no standing. There's no this or that. There's no perception. There's no seeing. There's no hearing. So it's existent in a state that's undescribable from the Buddha, though he tries to, obviously. And so Some groups have posited some kind of third way of existing, that we exist unenlightened existence, or existing as human beings, non-existence, and something in the middle. But the Buddha was clear that wasn't that. So it is a bit of a mystery. But we do know a couple of things. We know that he said it was a state of absolute no suffering of any kind. And well, I wish I could remember that quote. I just ran across it the other day. Um, but he does talk about it as being this blissful, amazing state. So I would side to the side to the idea that it is existence, but in a way that it's very hard for us to comprehend. And the Buddha believes it's the greatest of all existences. That being trapped in samsara is a kind of a mistaken way of existing, and we're trying to get out from under it. That's a tough topic to comment on because it's so easy to be wrong. I tried to give a very humble answer. Yeah. The Buddha wouldn't answer this question. Will you answer it for us, Tenzin Tarpa? Well, of course I will. Oh, yeah, but as secular Buddhists, we're often we're more concerned with our practice in our lives in this lifetime. Some of us have a belief in rebirth, others don't. And but regardless, uh, the end result of practice is the same, right? Whether you want to flourish in this lifetime or you want to become a Buddha, the practices don't change. It's the same. And so that's a belief. We don't have proof of it, so we leave that to you. And I'm here just to give you whatever information I have about it. But in the meantime, we can really transcend a whole lot of our suffering. Oh, I have a great one for it. So what we're really talking about is we're talking about transcending our suffering. Of course, in Buddhism, we use the word samsara, which is unenlightened existence, and we often demonize samsara in the word, but what we're really talking about is just common existence, right? We give this word samsara, and everybody's in samsara, but we're just talking about common existence, right? We have common existence, and then we have awakened existence. And so I think that's a little bit more of a grounded attitude. So when we talk about samsara and we talk about the problems with it, I think the easiest way to understand our suffering, the two arrows and samsara, is to imagine a junior high school student. Now we got a lot of parents here, and I guess everyone has different school systems, but so we're talking about kids between, I don't know, the ages of 10 and 14 or something, right? To me, that's a perfect example of samsara and suffering. So your daughter wakes up and she's got a big pimple on her face, right? Oh my God, right? What happens? Everybody gets pimples. It's not a big deal. Her friends get pimples, but to her, it is the end of the world. How could I ever show my face? I'm not going to school. So initially, when she first looks at it, and it's an injury, right? To her, let alone to her face, but to her spirit. It's an injury, and she's shocked by it. But then it's what she does with it. She starts spinning it in her head, and she starts imagining what her friends are going to say. This is samsara. This is the samsaric mind. Excuse me 1 second. I just have an itch. I'm not sick. Or she doesn't have the right shoes or the right shirt or the right pair of jeans that everybody's wearing. So what kids do is they exaggerate it, don't they? And they whip it into this big ordeal. It literally is the end of the world to them. How will I ever recover from such a thing? This is the exaggeration of samsara. Samsara is us exaggerating reality, right? We exaggerate the importance, the immediacy of life, right? That everything is so important and has to be done right now. And if it's not, the future is all kinds of problems. This is the mental quality of samsara. This is the second arrow, all right? Samsara is a quality of that. And so we don't outgrow that, though. You think a lot of you are chuckling and saying, yeah, I could imagine a kid doing that. But guess what? You're doing it right now. We're all doing it. We don't do it as bad, thank God. Well, a couple of you do. I'm not gonna I'm not gonna mention any names, but we all do it. And if you can notice it and become aware of it, that's the first step in working with it. But that's the nature of what we're talking about here. This is the real suffering. All of us can get in a car accident or take a fall or get cancer. We can all get physical illnesses and things. Most of that, a lot of that is out of our control. But this other aspect, we have control over. And when we become aware of it and when we learn how to deal with it, we can benefit our lives. And so, with that said, that's what we're going to work on tomorrow. So, again, today is a study class. We're giving you a presentation of suffering. Tomorrow, I'm going to share some techniques how to work with it. Right? And so, any questions? Does anybody recognize their own childish behavior like that? Can you think? Oh, I like the honest people in the room. Can you think of events that happened recently that maybe somebody said something and you didn't feel like you were given enough importance in a conversation, or we do it over really subtle things. A couple of you I've had some conversations about this with, and yeah, very good. Okay, if there's no questions, today we learned about suffering and its causes, and that suffering is not seen as a part of our true nature, but instead is understood as afflictions that plague us, similar to a physical illness. We also talked about understanding our afflictions as shared human limitations, which we all share and never choose. I stand by that. We don't choose our afflictions. In tomorrow's class, which is going to be lesson 8, we'll be exploring how to work with our suffering. So until then, today we are continuing to engage in today's practice of sustained appreciation, which we do by reciting the affirmation we post in our social media and contemplating it throughout the day. Remember it to also continue your practice of the threefold training. And when challenges arise, you have your best friend, the 4 steps of acceptance practice. Always remember, I'm a click away for help and support. And with that said, let's end today's teaching with our altruistic affirmation. May all be healthy, may all be prosperous, may all be well, may all be present, free of past regret and future worry. May all abide in constant appreciation, which is the source of great joy and contentment. May all realize their true nature and the true nature of reality, which is awakening. Thanks everybody for joining me. Boy, did I have fun. Remember that the SBT community was created for one purpose and one purpose only: to support beautiful, beautiful people like you. Okay, friends, see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Venerable Tarpa. Great
Yes,
today. Great
bye.
lecture.